Can everyone hear me? After this incredibly windy day, I'm a bit concerned that my voice is almost gone. I swallowed half of a plane tree on the way here, I think, as most of us did. Firstly, let me welcome you all to the third, it's many more than third, the 3-minute thesis competition grand final for the University of Melbourne for 2013. Let me begin by acknowledging the elders, families and descendants of the Wurundjeri people who have been and are the custodians of these lands. We acknowledge that the land that we meet on was the place of age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation and renewal. And that local Aboriginal peoples have had and continue to have a unique role in the life of these lands. And I extend that recognition to all Aboriginal people that might be here today. My name's Shane Huntington. I work in the Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences, and it has been my continued pleasure to be the MC of these events for the last few years. In fact, I get very excited as a former researcher myself and a communicator of research when I see all these fantastic group of 10 people here. I kind of feel like a mosquito at a nudist camp, if that makes sense. Because we're going to hear some fabulous research stories today presented in a way that you're probably not used to, certainly not in the way that you would get on the nightly news or what you would get at a conference or even at many public venues. These particular people have spent an incredible amount of time working on these particular presentations, fine-tuning them, and I'm talking them up to get them excited, but they simply are stunning, and the way they present this material is stunning, and I hope that you all enjoy. Firstly, the fact that they only go for 3 minutes, which I think is excellent because it means you don't have to wait too long to get the bang, but secondly, the quality of what they're producing is quite outstanding. And we hope that our finalists from today go further afield and do well across Australia and as the competition continues. At this point, I'd like to introduce a good colleague and old friend of mine, Professor Dick Strugnell. Dick's the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Graduate Research here at the University of Melbourne and is going to say a few words about the competition. Thank you, Dick.
Thank you. Thanks, Shane, and it's just fantastic to see so many people here. I mean, this is probably the best crowd we've had, Shane, do you think? Okay, and I did my welcome to this final for 2013 of the 3-minute thesis competition. The 3-minute thesis competition really ticks all the boxes. It's a competition which, for the candidates, allows them to spend quite a bit of time focusing on why they're asking their question, how they're answering their question, what they're likely to find or what they have found, and how to capture all that in a very succinct presentation. It trains our candidates in presentation skills, so the competition is supported by training. So students who go through the early heats and pass through that competition are increasingly provided with training to help them meet the challenges of a final like this, but also just in their general presentation skills. It provides our external stakeholders, and there are many of these, the people who pay their taxes to support universities and especially research, with an opportunity to engage with what we do. This is really important. This is because the 3MT participants, and some of them in the front row probably have already done this, are used by the university in many different ways. They find themselves on radio, they find themselves speaking at public events about their research. And this is really important that the lay public get to understand more and more about what we do at universities. The 3-minute thesis competition is not about dumbing down research. It's not about reducing the complexity of research so that it can be very simply understood by everybody. That's not really what it's about. It's about communication and distilling key messages out of the research activity so that people can understand it. We wouldn't have got here today without a lot of work by some really hard-working people, and I just want to acknowledge those briefly before I hand back to Shane. Firstly, there's the MSGR organisers, led by Sharon Harrison, who's sitting over here. Sharon works in Sylvia Schwarzschick's team with Cordelia and Liam. and Beck Hobden too has provided a lot of publicity for this event. Secondly, we have the judges, led by Simon Clues. Simon's on the end here. Simon's been at all the heats and semi-finals leading up to this event, and he's provided feedback to many, many of the candidates. Thirdly, and most importantly, there's been incredibly hard work by all the participants in this competition, and many of them aren't here, but we've got 10 finalists in front of us today. And those people have practiced their talks many, many times, and perhaps some of you are family of these participants, and some of you have probably heard these talks many, many times yourselves. I thank you for that. It will add to the quality of what we're going to hear today. Lastly, I'd like to thank you as an audience. These events only really happen because people are interested in what's going on, the sorts of activities provided by MSGR, and it's really a testament to the quality of this activity that we have so many people here today. So thank you for attending. This event is also being streamed live. We're not sure how many people are watching, but welcome everybody who's watching it online to the University of Melbourne in this spectacular venue in the Brain Centre. So I'll hand over to Shane and he'll take us through the competition.
Thank you, Dick. As mentioned, it is being streamed live. I suspect there's no point in me giving out the website because if people aren't already watching it, it's too late. And if they are watching it, they already know it. So I'll leave that out. Just so you know how the event will go for the next hour or so, in a moment I'll introduce the first of our 10 contestants, and each of them will have their 3 minutes to present. There'll be a very short break while we attach a microphone to the next contestant, and then we will proceed. After that, we will give the judges a little bit of time. We'll hear a bit more music. While we like to give them music to think with, it's very helpful. We'll hear some more music, and then after that, we will announce third place, second place, and first place. After that, we will also be announcing the People's Choice Award, and later in the afternoon, you will get instructions on how to vote for this. This is one of those amazing, apparently real-time voting scenarios where you can use your phones or something. I'm not sure. Sharon knows all about it. She's got instructions we'll put up for the People's Choice Award, so that will be interesting as well. It's always interesting to compare the judges' outcomes with what you thought was the best. On the judges, I'd like to introduce them. Simon Clues has already been mentioned. Simon is the Director of the Writing Centre for Scholars and Researchers here at the University of Melbourne, and has been a key part of this competition for as long as I've been involved, and is of great assistance to all of our contestants. And every time I see them perform, he's also sitting there listening. So some of you at home may have heard these a few times. He's heard them many, many times, and is still very patient and eager to hear them again. Next to Simon is an old friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Andi Horvath. She's now working in our media office here at the University of Melbourne. Andi has extensive experience with communication, specifically of science, but in research in general. Welcome, Andi. And Bob Williamson is at the end, and Bob usually is the one giving the speech, not listening to the speech, but Bob is an incredible advocate for research around this country. He's part of the Academy of Science in Canberra, and there is no person who can speak to policy as well as Bob, in my opinion, across this country. He pushes what we do better than anyone I have come across. So we expect great things from you in judging, Bob, seriously. Now then, we should get down to business because that's what we're all here for. I would like to invite up to the general region of the stage. They have been told they can stand anywhere on the wood. Simon Crouch, who is our first speaker. Simon's from the Melbourne School of Population and Global Health, and he'll be speaking on the topic, "The Kids Are All Right." Simon.
I'd like to begin by taking you back almost 4 years to an unconventional scene in a delivery suite on the other side of the world. A man stands cradling his newborn child in his steady arms, his same-sex partner looking on joyfully while their tired surrogate smiles up at them from her bed. This is a happy, albeit non-traditional family. This is my family. Now, I knew that my family would always be different, but like many first-time parents, my partner's anxieties bubbled to the surface. "I hope our son won't be disadvantaged by having 2 dads," he said, seeking my reassurance. "He is going to be all right, isn't he?" Well, all too soon, my son turned 1, and that seed of doubt persisted, so I decided to begin research into the issue. I asked the question, what is the complete physical, mental, and social well-being of children with same-sex attracted parents? You see, we know that child health is an important marker of lifelong health outcomes. But by the time my son was 2, I had found out that we do not fully understand the health of children with same-sex parents, and in particular, the impact of stigma and discrimination. So I designed a study using internationally recognized measures of child health, and I sent surveys to gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered parents across Australia. Shortly after my son's 3rd birthday, I had information on 500 children under the age of 18 years. I started to interview families to contextualize their experiences and to capture the voices of the children themselves. Now today, on the eve of my son's 4th birthday, I have discovered that children with same-sex attracted parents score well on measures such as self-esteem and emotional behaviour when compared to the average Australian child, and significantly better on measures of general health. I have identified, however, that experiences of stigma have a negative impact on many aspects of their health. But same-sex families get along really well, and through communication skills and coping strategies, these negative experiences of discrimination can be minimised. As I look forward, I see a bright future, where families like mine are accepted in all aspects of life. By the time my son is 5, my research will have informed schools and healthcare services so that they better understand same-sex families, and members of Parliament will no longer be able to accept arguments that same-sex attracted people are not fit to be parents. Now, I never did tell you what I said to my partner all those years ago when he asked if our son would be all right. Well, I took them both in my arms and I told them right there and then what I felt in my heart and what I now know to be true. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Just miking up our second contestant, Rajini Srinivasan. I hope I got that right. She's been training me all morning. Is from the Department of Anatomy and Neuroscience at Prince Henry's Institute, and will be speaking on when sex is ambiguous. Okay.
Is my baby a boy or a girl? That's the first question that parents would ask. But can you imagine if your doctor can't answer that? This happens to 1 in 100 children who are born intersex, as they have a mix of both male and female reproductive organs. They may completely resemble a member of the opposite sex. Ethan Atwood and Katie Barrett in the top panel both grew up as girls. But they have XY sex chromosomes, which means genetically they're male. Externally, they have female genitals, but internally they have testes that could become cancerous. Many intersex people feel confused and ashamed and are shocked to realize they can't bear their own children. What's worse is that they're often discriminated against. Shanti Soundarajan and Kasta Samanya in the bottom panels are 2 well-known athletes who were humiliated when their gender was questioned. This negative public perception comes from a lack of information on intersexuality. So why are some people born intersex? There is so little we know about this that doctors find it difficult to accurately diagnose and to provide advice on treatments. This is why my PhD research on the genetics behind intersex disorders is so important. I work with the DNA of such patients, specifically those who have mutations or variations in a gene called SF1. SF1 works like a switch, and it turns on another gene that's needed to make a testis. So I wondered whether the switch might not be working properly in intersex patients. To find out, I grew human cells on a dish, and I inserted into these cells SF1 from these patients. I then measured how efficiently the switch works. I found that in most of these patients, the switch doesn't even work, so a normal testis can't develop and female characteristics form instead. What's more is that the less efficiently the switch works, the more severe the symptoms are. So we can actually use this test to predict how severely an intersex child may be affected. My research will help doctors to improve intersex diagnosis and prognosis. Knowing the biological causes for intersexuality will also help people to better understand and accept the condition. So perhaps one day, intersex people can hold their heads up high like Caster Semenya did at the Olympics last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Regini. Are we halfway? No. Keeping count, 2 so far. A great measure of how good these presenters are is at the end for you to be able to recall all of the different stories that they have told. If you think back to all the conferences and public lectures and so forth you've been at, even the movies you've seen in your life, it's actually very hard to recall them all. You tend to always recall the good ones. So by my count, 2 so far, that you have to recall. See if you can recall the entire 10. Next up is Alicia Heath. Alicia's from the School of Population and Global Health and is speaking about death, disease and vitamin D. Alicia.
Are you getting enough? I know that I'm not, and more than half the people in this room aren't either. At least 1 billion people around the world are vitamin D deficient because they are not getting enough sunshine. When our skin is exposed to the sun, ultraviolet B radiation enables us to produce vitamin D in our skin cells. The problem is that sun exposure also causes skin cancer. We're therefore encouraged to avoid the sun. Most of you would be aware that vitamin D is essential for maintaining strong bones and preventing osteoporosis. But we have recently discovered that vitamin D could also be important for the prevention of many other diseases, including diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and some cancers. Have we made a big mistake? By depriving ourselves of sun exposure, are we actually increasing our risk of disease? My research is addressing these questions. I'm using data from a long-term study of 41,000 people living in Melbourne. These participants were recruited in the early 1990s when they were aged between 40 and 70, and information on their diet and lifestyle was obtained, as well as physical measurements and blood samples. We have measured vitamin D levels in blood samples from 7,000 of these participants, and they've now been followed up for over 20 years for health outcomes. By comparing people with low vitamin D levels to those with high vitamin D levels, I have found that people with low vitamin D levels have a substantial increased risk of death. It's important to understand the reasons for this increase. So I'm also investigating whether people with low vitamin D levels are more likely to develop type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. In Australia, cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death. We are also in the midst of a diabetes epidemic, with over 270 Australians diagnosed with diabetes every day. My research will determine whether some of these cases could be prevented if people have adequate vitamin D levels. The preliminary results of my research suggest that vitamin D could be the key to a long and healthy life. While sun exposure is the most efficient way to obtain vitamin D, we will always be faced with the dilemma of how to increase our vitamin D levels without increasing our risk of skin cancer. We might need to consider fortifying food with vitamin D to compensate for our hypervigilant sun-smart behaviour. In the meantime, to put this all into perspective, if you had just spent the last 3 minutes outside in the sun on a summer's day, you could have just obtained your daily dose of vitamin D necessary for optimal health. You can get enough. But are you? Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. I always find some of these talks particularly disturbing personally because of my hair loss problem. However, we must take this advice and do with it as we can. Our next speaker is Matthew Bliss. Matthew's from, I should say they're not all from the medical side of the campus either. We have some special people over this time that are, not non-medical. It's been a while, but we've got there. It's a big campus. Matthew Bliss is from the School of Earth Sciences on the completely opposite corner of the University of Melbourne's main campus, and he's speaking about volcanic arcs and Earth's history. Matt.
Everywhere you go, you are surrounded by over 4.5 billion years of Earth's history. This history is preserved in the wondrous landscapes that dominate our planet, such as towering mountain ranges and deep river valleys. Much like a sculptor starts with a block of marble, so too the Earth begins with one material from which all these landscapes are created. This material is called magma, or lava, and is produced at volcanoes all around the world. My PhD looks at volcanoes in places called volcanic arcs, where we find numerous erupting volcanoes, equally spaced over several thousand kilometres, in an arc-like shape. There are over a dozen volcanic arcs worldwide, the nearest to us being Indonesia, and they are continuously producing the material that makes up the continents which we live on. Magma formation in these arcs is currently thought to only involve 3 unique components. This understanding has largely come from geochemistry, that's the chemistry of the Earth, and it's been generated from research on a limited range of chemical elements. However, with the highly sensitive instruments at our disposal, we can now analyse a wider range of elements, and in doing so, stand to gain a far greater understanding of volcanic arcs and magma formation than ever before. So, this is where I come in. My lab work is pretty awesome. I take my rock, crush it into a powder and dissolve it in some acid. I take that mix and place it into a mass spectrometer, which turns my liquid sample into a gas by vaporising it in a flame that is the temperature of the sun's surface, about 8,000 degrees. This machine then tells me that the concentration of my elements in my samples is very, very low. How low? Less than 1 part in 1 million. That's 0.0000001%, equivalent to a single grain of rice in 20 kilos. What's truly amazing is that these elements, despite their extremely low concentrations, tell us a great deal about large-scale processes, such as volcanoes and the evolution of the Earth. My work on these elements shows that the creation of magma in volcanic arcs involves several more components than the 3 currently thought. More importantly, by demonstrating these elements can be analysed, I'm laying the foundation for future generations of geologists to use them to further our understanding of the processes that continuously shape our beautiful planet. Thank you.
Jonathan Kolieb is from the Melbourne Law School, and he will be speaking on corporate peace building, regulating business for conflict transformation. Please come to the stage, Jonathan.
Do you ever wonder what makes that smartphone in your pocket tick? Well, it turns out not just snazzy design and great marketing, but minerals. Minerals that are often sourced from some of the most war-ravaged corners of our globe. From mines like this one behind me in the Democratic Republic of Congo that used to be owned by an Australian company named Anvil. The mining of these so-called conflict minerals often involves the bribing of local warlords, militias or government officials and the undermining of local authorities. This is but one way that today's business in the world's war zones, often with rather negative consequences for the hopes of peace. And unfortunately, the story of this mine doesn't end there. You see, Anvil was accused of complicity in war crimes. In 2004, the mine was shut down due to a village uprising nearby. Congolese soldiers responded, coming in planes and trucks supplied by Anvil. They met no resistance in the village, yet the next day, 100 villagers turned up dead, some bodies exhibiting signs of torture and rape. The mine reopened 3 days later. My PhD investigates the question of Australian corporate involvement in war-affected regions of our world. Can corporate actors such as MPhil contribute not to war and violence, but to the peace? Of course, this is but one episode that demonstrates that what I've termed corporate peace building is far from realised. I conceive of this problem as one of poor governance, a lack of effective regulation of corporations in conflict zones. Indeed, my analysis of the relevant international and Australian laws and other instruments suggests that Australian corporations doing business in conflict zones often operate in what could be described as a regulatory vacuum. There is often a lack of clear and binding legal standards. What standards they do have, like United Nations codes of conduct, are voluntary, with weak or no enforcement mechanisms at all. And few incentives exist to inspire better corporate citizenship in areas of conflict. So, drawing on peace-building theories as well as regulatory theories, my research proposes an innovative regulatory framework that seeks to tap the competitive nature of Australian big business to maximise the potential and possibility of corporate peace building, to not only prevent, punish and deter conflict-causing corporate behaviour, but to actually encourage and incentivise the Australian business community to become partners in peace building in places like the Congo. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan. So we are just hooking up the microphone to our next contestant first, folks, and that is Rahul Chakrabarti, who is from the Centre for Eye Research Australia and the Department of Ophthalmology. And Rahul will be speaking about the eye in diabetes.
I'd like you to picture yourself a farmer in the remote hills of Vietnam. You've had a bleed in the back of your eye from diabetes and have suddenly lost your vision. What do you do? The nearest eye doctor is an 8-hour bus journey away, and by the time you get help, the damage is permanent. Now, this is a story of a real person who I met. The condition is called diabetic retinopathy. It affects the retina, or the back of the eye, in 1 in 3 people with diabetes, and is the leading cause of avoidable blindness in working-age populations. Now, the good news is that sight-threatening changes are entirely preventable with timely eye examination and treatment. Now, in Australia, we have an effective public health system that can cope with the growing demand of managing diabetes and its complications. But this is not necessarily the case in low-resource countries where 70% of global diabetes exists. The World Health Organization called for the development of guidelines to assist health policymakers in low-resource countries to improve eye care services for people with diabetes. As current guidelines are mostly published from developed countries with sophisticated healthcare infrastructures. My PhD aimed to develop guidelines that were informed by people working in low-resource settings. First, I set out to identify the best evidence for the management of diabetic retinopathy. But what I really needed to know was whether this gold standard evidence was applicable and feasible in low-resource settings. So I developed a survey to assess the feasibility of applying the evidence in 3 different low-resource countries: Vietnam, Cambodia, and the Philippines. And in each country, I interviewed health policymakers, healthcare workers, and patients themselves to identify the barriers they faced with regards to diabetes and eye care. And the findings are fascinating. Firstly, there is a clear need for greater education and awareness amongst the community and healthcare workers, as currently people with diabetes are typically referred for an eye examination only when they report symptoms of vision loss, and by that stage, it's too late. And whilst most specialist services are concentrated in metropolitan areas, there are village healthcare workers and nurses who can be trained to perform simple tasks, such as getting a person to read letters on an eye chart or taking a retinal photo that can then be sent to specialists hundreds of kilometres away for expert opinion. And these interventions are sustainable if integrated within existing public health infrastructures. The point is that vision loss from diabetes is entirely preventable. So whether you're in the remote hills of Vietnam or outback Australia, remember to look out for the I in diabetes. Thank you.
I always find after this particular competition, I find myself Googling a whole lot of symptoms that I have. No, you just get worried. It worries me. Thank you, Rahul, for covering this important topic. Our next contestant, and believe it or not, we're up to number 7. Been counting so far? Can everyone recite the 6 topics that we've heard from thus far? I hope so for your sake. Our next contestant is Lyndon Ashcroft. Lyndon is from the School of Earth Sciences and will be speaking about uncovering our climate history. Lyndon.
You may not believe it, given today's fine Melbourne weather, but Australia has just experienced its warmest 12 months on record. This included our hottest day, week, month, and season. Before that, in 2010, 2011, we had our wettest 2 years on record. These climatic overachievers caused devastating floods and heat waves across Australia. And as records continue to tumble, you've got to ask, is this part of our natural climate? Or is this human-induced climate change? My PhD aims to help answer this question by uncovering our climate's history. Learning more about past temperature and rainfall patterns is important to separate natural climate variability from the climate change signal. My focus is on our area, southeastern Australia, because it's home to over 15 million people and it produces half of our country's food. I have searched through libraries, archives, old newspapers and diaries to find numerical weather observations from European settlement in 1788 right up to the formation of the Bureau of Meteorology in 1908. The records I've found come from farmers, explorers, astronomers, even a pub owner. Now, of course, observations that are over 100 years old haven't been taken using today's methods. When interpreting the data, I need to consider things like where the instruments were kept. Was the thermometer outside in the shade, for example, or was it in a cellar next to the beer? The data also need to make sense. So a cold temperature in Melbourne should mean southerly winds or rain and cloud, like today. If I don't see this agreement, then there might be something dodgy going on, so I'd put less weight on those records in my analysis. After running these tests, the old records have heaps to tell me about the past. Did you know that in August 1849 it snowed right here in Melbourne? And that the early 1890s was so wet that Punt Road in Richmond, right near the MCG, sometimes looked like this. The old records also have a lot to say about the present. Importantly, they suggest that the warming trends in our region today are the strongest since at least 1860, meaning our recent high temperatures probably aren't natural. The old records also indicate that the drivers of our rainfall have varied over the past 225 years, and the features that normally cause drought haven't always done so. This is a big deal for drought research and future water management. My PhD has extended the climate record of our area by more than 70 years, providing exciting new, but old, information for scientists and historians. We may now be in a better position to understand and prepare for climate change, armed with the longest record on record. Thank you.
Thank you, Lyndon. And I'll be speaking to you later about whether I should plant my tomatoes yet or wait. Because you never know these days in Melbourne. Just when you think it's warmed up, we get a lovely day like today, although it was still warm. Our next speaker is Sally Sherwin. Sally is from the Department of Agriculture and Food Systems, and the topic of her talk is Who's Looking at Who in the Zoo?
Imagine waking up to crowds of people at your house every day. Some might even be banging on your windows or yelling to get your attention. Now, give yourself a tail and you're imagining life for Damo the capuchin monkey at Melbourne Zoo. I'm sure most of us here have been to a zoo before and would recall the lively hordes of people excited to see the animals.
But have you ever wondered if the animals are as excited to see us as we are to see them? This is where my PhD comes in. Over the past decade, zoos have moved away from the amusement park scene and reinvented themselves as conservation organisations that fight extinction. And along with this transformation has come a new emphasis on improving animal welfare. But for some species, humans in zoos can be a source of fear and stress. This is not only of ethical concern, but it can hinder conservation efforts because stress hormones compromise health and reproduction. On the other hand, it's also possible that some species find the changing crowd stimulating. In fact, the lions at Melbourne Zoo spend a lot of their time watching small children. The problem is, there is huge variation in how different animals respond to humans. Nobody has studied this in a range of species before, until now. I research a whole collection of animals, from monkeys to rhinos and meerkats and kangaroos. And you might be thinking, how on earth can I tell what all these different animals think of us humans? The animals actually leave little clues for me. Their poo. Animal poo is a goldmine of data for my PhD. This is because stress hormones are eventually excreted in feces. So I collect fecal samples from the animals under different visitor conditions and analyse them in the lab for changes in these hormone levels. I also study their behaviour and look at whether they adjust their position in enclosure or activity in response to visitors. Turns out, kangaroos, for example, prefer to keep their distance from large crowds, whereas meerkats aren't bothered at all by us visitors. As for Damo and the other monkeys, I found that visitors often unintentionally threaten these guys with smiles and stares. This is because such facial expressions in monkey world are considered aggressive. So when I blocked the monkey's view of humans by using one-way vision screens, they relaxed, stopped threatening the visitors, and fought each other less. This is a win for welfare and is already being used by Melbourne Zoo to redesign their enclosure. By studying more and more species, we can make informed recommendations to improve the welfare of animals in zoos around the world. And zoos that put the welfare of their animals, like Damo, first, will ultimately be the ones that make long-lasting contributions to fighting extinction. These are the zoos that I want to visit.
Thank you very much, Sally. Our penultimate contestant is Bernd Merkel. He's from the Department of Radiology and is speaking about white matter lesions. Can physical activity prevent Alzheimer's disease? I sure hope so.
When was the last time that you saw your parents? Imagine you're visiting them at their home, you walk into the living room, your dad is sitting there, and you just say, "Hey Dad, how is it going?" But he looks at you blankly and answers, "Who are you?" Unfortunately, this is not an uncommon situation for people who are suffering from dementia. Parents don't recognize their own children anymore. In fact, every 6 minutes, so this is just the duration of 2 talks today. Every 6 minutes, a person here in Australia is diagnosed with dementia. And Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. It's an irreversible, progressive brain disease, and there is no current effective medical treatment. And this is where my PhD comes in. We want to know whether physical activity can slow down the progression of so-called white matter lesions in older adults. And we are using magnetic resonance imaging for that. White matter lesions are small regions of dead brain cells, and they are commonly accepted to be associated with an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. You can see those white matter lesions on my slide. On the right side, you see a participant's brain with a quite high amount of white matter lesions. Below, the first ever recorded Alzheimer patient from 1905. She was also from Germany. On the left side, you see in comparison a participant's brain with a quite low amount of white matter lesions. The participants of my study are all at least 60 years old. They have mild cognitive impairment or subjective memory complaints, and at least one vascular risk factor, like diabetes, blood hypertension, or obesity. This means they are all under high risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in the future. At the Royal Melbourne Hospital, we are acquiring images of all our participants at a first visit. Then, half of our participants undergo a physical activity program for 2 years. After 2 years, they are all coming back. We are acquiring images of all of their brains again, and we can compare them. So I am highly interested in developing a novel, accurate, and automated method to detect and quantify those white matter lesions. Sometimes they can be very tiny, sometimes they can be very numerous. So doing this manually would be very time-consuming. And having detected and quantified them, I can correlate this with the physical activity level and the vascular risk factor. Through this project, I hope we can make an important contribution in understanding the complex mechanisms of Alzheimer's disease, and one day in the future, less people will suffer from the disease, and more parents will still be able to recognize their own children.
Thank you, Bernd. Hard to believe we're up to the last one, isn't it? I think it's fair to say they go quick when they're good. Krista Calander is our last speaker. She is from the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences and will be speaking about tuning out tinnitus.
Silence. That blissful thing we crave at the end of a hard day. But imagine if you could never hear silence again. Instead, a buzzing, hissing, or ringing sound was your inescapable nightmare. Why? Because it's all in your head, and it's a condition called tinnitus. The sound of tinnitus is something most of us briefly experience. If you're sick, tired, stressed, or maybe after a big night out on the town. But for around 20% of people, those sounds become chronic. And chronic tinnitus is associated with poor concentration, less sleep, depression, anxiety, even suicide. And the worst part? There is no definitive cure because we don't understand tinnitus. Instead, sufferers who seek help are frequently told, look, it's all in your head. Just get over it. Tune it out. This concerning reality is what my research aims to address by honing in on this idea of tuning out the sounds, a process called habituation. Ticking clocks, traffic, and the hum of your fridge are all sounds we commonly tune out. If the brain tuned us into all the available sounds, we'd be bombarded by confusing noise. Instead, the brain filters out or habituates the less important stuff. Now, how this happens is a bit of a mystery, so I'm going to demystify habituation, which may hold the key to understanding and treating tinnitus. To do this, I'm using 3 techniques. Firstly, a technology called EEG, which records your brain activity or brain waves. When we hear a sound, our brain responds with a characteristic wave. I'm looking to see how this wave changes over time as we hear sounds, and this will tell us when habituation happens. I'm also using neuroimaging to see where in the brain this happens. By taking multiple snapshots of the brain as people listen to sounds, we can see the parts that change as they're tuning them out. Finally, I'm surveying mood, coping strategies, and thinking styles to see how individual differences can help or hinder our ability to habituate. So what will all this lead to? If we can map out when, where, and how habituation happens in people with and without tinnitus, we can see how this process normally happens and what aspect malfunctions in tinnitus sufferers. This knowledge can inform better treatments so everyone, at the end of that hard day, can enjoy the sound of silence.
Thank you, Krista, and happy birthday. Before this event, I always like to make sure that I know how to pronounce everything, so I looked up tinnitus on the web, and the first thing I found was a YouTube video by William Shatner, which I thought was pretty much, the only version I was going to look up, and I pronounced tinnitus when I was younger, and anyway, William Shatner rules. Folks, we're going to hand back over now for a few minutes to our good friends Eamon and Doody here, who by coincidence are also part of the Eamon and Doody project, while we give our judges some time to deliberate. And of course, you will also have the instructions now for the People's Choice Awards voting, which is done using the cordless phones you all apparently have in your pockets. If you haven't been supplied with one of these cordless phones, please talk to Sharon. She has some spares. We'll be about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll be back with the awards for first, second, and third. Thank you. In a moment, I hope, I will have the names for our winners. I feel like I should have a sidekick. Now, we have had a situation this year that we haven't had before in the past, and as a result, we won't be paying our judges. Unfortunately, they have been unable to award a third place. However, they have awarded 2 second places. So, while we were all listening to music, I wandered over to our 10 contestants and I said, this year I thought it was incredibly hard to pick between them. And there was such a narrow range in terms of the quality was so high across the board with all of them. Something that we have seen to some degree in previous years, but this year it was just incredibly close. So for those of you who are not in that top 3 group, congratulations. I think you've done a magnificent job today, and you were, I know this hurts, but within a very small margin of coming first, all of you. So well done. So let's immediately move on to second place. I'm going to call both of the second place winners up together, because essentially we don't want to distinguish them. They literally did come out as equal, and we weren't sure what to do at this point because we haven't had this happen before, but we basically followed the principles the judges have been given, and that entitled both of them to be given the second place award, and we will readjust the award for second place accordingly to share it amongst the 2 of them. So they both get half of what, well, I don't know. I think Dick's putting in some personal cash. So first of all, let me call up our first second place getter, which is Rahul Chakrabarti. Congratulations. And our second place getter is Bernd Merkel. Well done, guys. I think you'll all agree, these 2, they did an absolutely fantastic job, and I hope that you sort of take away from this event the fact that research can be delivered to a general audience in an entertaining, concise and thought-provoking way, and both of these gentlemen have done that at an exceptionally high standard today, so congratulations, gentlemen. Yep. Now, is that it? We done? Oh. First place. So, again, a very difficult decision for the judges, but I'm told this was a clear winner out in front of these 2 gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to announce that this year's 2013 3-minute thesis competition grand final winner here at the University of Melbourne is Sally Sherwin. I sure hope that she's getting public transport home with that novelty check. Nothing like a novelty check to get people looking at you like you're in a zoo. I'd like to see what happens to that if you give it to Damo. Congratulations, guys. I'll get you to take a seat while we head on to the next part. As you know, we've been adding up the scores for the People's Choice Award, and I'm now going to invite Simon Clues, one of our judges, up to say a few words and to present that award.
For my sins, I've seen every heat, every semi, and every final for 3 years now, and this competition just gets better and better. As someone who thinks that communicating what we do in this amazing place to the rest of the world is very important, it's very gratifying to be part of this. I'd just like to thank two people. I'd like to thank Triple R for sponsoring the People's Choice Award, which is this wonderful iPad. I was going to say bottom room. Equally importantly, I would like to thank the 62 people who have taken part this year. You 10 guys, you are amazing, you are wonderful, we salute you. But the 62 people who took part this year have all learned something. They are all winners in a way, and I know that's a terrible cliche, but this is not just about winning, as much as I'm about to give out a prize. It's about the skills that you'll learn along the way. Those communication skills that these people learn will get them any grant, any job, they will open doors. So to the 62 people who made this competition amazing this year, we thank you, we salute you. Now, the Triple R People's Choice Award. As a judge, it is always very nice to be proven right. So, Sally, up you come.
Thank you, Simon. Well, just before we leave, and congratulations again, Sally. A few thank yous. In particular, as Simon said, all the competitors, their colleagues, friends and family, you are hereby liberated from this experience and will not have to listen to these talks again, but thank you very much for all the support that you've given them and helped them practice. The graduate schools and supervisors of all our finalists and the support that they give them to spend the time to do this. I don't think it can be overstated just how much time is involved in preparing these. They only last for 3 minutes, but I suspect it feels like it took 3 years to prepare for them. So it has been a very big deal, and we thank you for that. Also, up here is a list of the very large number of people that I refuse to read out. You can see your name there if you're one of them, and if not, please consider the time that they've all given up as part of this judging process. It does take a big effort to get this going for the university, and all of these people have provided advice to all of our contestants along the way, which I know they very much appreciate and have modified their presentations accordingly. And we have to thank these people as much as our contestants for the quality that we've seen today. I also would like to especially thank our three judges, Simon, Andy and Bob. I'm not sure if they pay you, but they should. You were given a very difficult but hopefully pleasurable job today of hearing these talks. Thank you very much for your time.